The opinions expressed during this show are not necessarily those of this station, its employees, or advertisers, but are solely the opinions of the host and the guests that appear on the show. It's time now for Tea Party Talk with TomZ, hosted by Tom Zawistowski, president of the We the People Convention and executive director of the Portage County Tea Party. Get ready to become a totally engaged American who is informed about the critical issues that are affecting the welfare and individual rights of all Americans today.
S&K Asphalt and Concrete has been serving residential, commercial, and industrial customers since 1988 with quality paving services. The experts at S&K Asphalt and Concrete have the knowledge and experience to meet your paving needs. From parking lots to driveways to repairs and resurfacing, S&K paves the way. Call today for a free estimate. 330-724-9090. That's 330-724-9090. Or visit online at skasphaltconcrete.com.
Are you concerned about your family's safety? Now, Target Thing Pro Shop is a female-friendly gun shop, range, and training center. Target Thing is in Garrettsville. Or on the web at targetthing.com. Target Thing is where they offer guns, ammo, and training to help you keep your family safe. Target Thing Pro Shop.
Fed up with politicians who care more about special interests than people on Main Street? So is Opportunity Ohio. We're working hard to solve Ohio's toughest challenges so Ohioans can create more jobs to grow our economy. See our plans and consider a tax-deductible contribution at opportunityohio.org. Invest $25 for a signed copy of Matt Mayer's book, The Founding Debate, Where Should the Power Over Our Lives Reside? Please visit opportunityohio.org.
Good morning, and thank you once again for taking time out of your day to join us on Tea Party Talk with TomZ. Everyone who's joining us live on Wednesday mornings at 10:30 at teapartytalkwithtomz.com, welcome to you for watching the live stream. And everyone on the radio on 640 WHLO in Akron, Ohio at 9 o'clock from 9 to 9:30 on WHLO, which reaches 66 of the 88 counties of Ohio, as well as parts of western Pennsylvania, Michigan, Indiana, and parts of Canada. Thanks for all of you for joining us. And for everybody out there in Colorado and Texas and Florida and other places around the state, United States who are listening on iHeartRadio at www.640whlo.com. Thank you for joining us once again. We've got a great show for you, and I'm very excited about our guest. Our guest today is noted author and conservative thinker, Professor Angelo Codevilla, who wrote the must-read conservative book, The Ruling Class, for which Rush Limbaugh wrote the foreword. I want to thank you, Professor, for joining us this morning. I know it's very early on the West Coast.
Oh, it's not that early. The sun is shining, and it's warm and lovely, unlike where you are.
That's right. Could you send us some of that heat? It's been awful cold, Professor. Your book, it was really a kind of a landmark book because it defined what you call the ruling class, and it really wasn't Republicans versus Democrats. It was different than that. Can you define for our listeners what you mean by the ruling class? Who are they?
Look, there is a complex of persons, generally quite well off, whose fortunes and identity depend on their more or less high-level connections with government, high-level materially and psychologically. Their livelihoods come from those connections. Well, I'm talking about persons in big business, education, and the media, who live by government subsidies, government contracts, by government regulations, and who are defined above all by a certain contempt for the rest of Americans. The ruling class is defined by a set of attitudes which one may call political correctness, which begin with, thou shalt not criticize the rest of us. We are better than the rest of Americans.
Very interesting. So, this group goes to the same colleges. They kind of have, in your book,
right.
that you kind of showed.
Educated in the same places. In terms of economic interests, today, I believe next week there's going to be a set of oral arguments in the Supreme Court on King versus Burwell, which is a case which will decide whether the Obamacare law actually means what it says, because it says that subsidies will be available only to those who got them through state established exchanges. Well, most states have not established those exchanges, and in fact, most people who get those subsidies do not get them as the law prescribes. Well, if you will note when you read if you read carefully the accounts of those oral arguments, that the briefs sustaining the Obama administration's position that it can do whatever it wants come from the complex of the healthcare industry. We're talking about not doctors, of course, but rather hospital administrators, insurance companies, medical device makers, et cetera, et cetera. All of these people have bet enormous amounts of money on being able to farm the U.S. government's subsidies through consumers, but basically to themselves. Mm-hmm. This is one of the many, many, many examples that corporate America, large corporate America, lives by and through the government.
Yeah.
The global warming campaign. This is by, of, and for big business, which is making enormous amounts of money on regulations and will make, as time goes by, even more money on regulations that are geared to this supposed phenomenon of global warming. The amount of government money and corporate money that is going to foster this global warming campaign is enormous, because the returns to the ruling class from the global warming campaign are even greater. So we're talking about people who have great material interests and even greater psychological interests in identifying amongst themselves and separating themselves from the rest of the American people.
Well, Professor, it's interesting to us, in the Tea Party movement particularly, that there's almost a part of this ruling class psychology where basically they just ignore the facts. Like you just mentioned global warming. You just mentioned the King Burwell cases we've talked a lot about on our show. But in King Burwell, Doc, it's clear as a bell. It says right in the bill there'd be no subsidies, and they just say it's not so.
Letter law. It's what do these words mean? I would be surprised if during those arguments, Justice Scalia or perhaps Justice Alito do not hold up their hand in front of the Solicitor General and ask him how many fingers are there in this hand. The man will say 5. But say, well, now look. What if I were to tell you that unless you say that there are perhaps only 4, certain terrible social consequences will ensue? The prospect of those consequences and the need to avoid them should lead you to acknowledge that there are only 4 fingers in this hand.
Yeah, we live in the world where there's facts.
I can't do that. Well, yes, you can, because you've just done it with in your argument about King versus Burwell, because the law says X, but you say that if we acknowledge that the law says what it says, well, there will be bad social consequences. Mm-hmm. What does the law say? How many fingers are there in my hand? Are you willing to acknowledge the truth? Truth? What truth doesn't really matter. What really matters is what is socially useful.
Yeah.
And what is socially useful? Socially useful is what we say it is. Oh, really? There you have the essential of the ruling class mentality.
Right.
Socially useful is what we say it is, and therefore what we say is the truth. Why? Because it has to be. And the important thing which you hinted at immediately when you started talking about this, is that this is not a Republican versus Democrat phenomenon, because Republican leaders, not Republican voters, big distinction there. Republican leaders are very much part of the ruling class and have equal contempt for the rest of the American people. What makes Republicans most interesting is that what they're doing, whereas what the Democrats are doing makes a perfect political sense. What the Republican leaders are doing is quintessentially stupid, because here you have politicians in a democracy who express contempt for their own voters. This is a very, very unique level of idiocy.
Well, as you can tell, the Tea Party, is really one of the first groups to stand up and say these things. That's not true. Here's the facts. It's black and white. And that's why they've been calling us, names and trying to demean us.
Every name in the book.
So,
every name in the book.
Right. And so what do you think? Has the Tea Party done a good job?
When you are called obscurantist, you may as well say, "Oh yes, and I'm also racist, homophobic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera."
Right, Islamic, fascist.
These things all go together, and what they mean is, you are not us. You are inferior. Knuckle under, you.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're not going to do that. I think you know that for sure. There's a big debate in the Tea Party movement because we're as frustrated, not just the Tea Party, but the American people are angry about the lack of representation from either party. And we've kind of discussed this issue. Do you break from them or what?
Representation.
Yeah. How do you handle that? I mean, our good friend Richard Vigieri wrote the book Takeover, which kind of says we need to infiltrate the Republican Party and take it over. And we've been doing that.
You see, that has been the strategy of conservatives for half a century.
Right. Hasn't gotten us much.
Look, I'm old enough to remember when Barry Goldwater in 1960. I was 17 years old. Said, "Wake up, Republicans! Go out and conquer the Republican Party." Well, we've been doing that for half a century, and although we certainly have done that at the grassroots level, at the highest level of the parties, we have failed totally, and will continue to fail totally. What you're seeing right now is a reprise of what we've seen many times before, namely that Republican leaders get elected promising one thing, and then immediately after they get into office, do exactly the opposite. Now, this, like the boy who cried wolf once too often, is being done too often. And it seems to me that in 2016, the Republican nomination for president will not be worth having, because people will ask themselves now, why should I vote Republican? They started doing this in the 1990s. In 1992.
Right.
You may be old enough to remember what happened then. George H.W. Bush was elected on a sacred pledge not to raise taxes.
Yep.
He did that. He went out and raised taxes.
Yep.
And then presented himself to the electorate. And the electorate said, no, we're not going to vote for you. We'll vote for anybody but you.
That's right. Well, Doc, we're running out of time here.
Along came a man named Ross Perot.
Right.
Who had nothing to recommend him but the virulent attack on the ruling class. Before he self-destructed, he was leading everyone in the polls.
Yeah, people want an alternative.
He would have won.
Yeah, they want an alternative. Doc, I really appreciate you coming on with us and talking. People, folks, this is a must-read book. Please get the book, The Ruling Class. And Dr. Codevilla, keep fighting the fight, and we will as well. Thanks for joining us this morning.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right, you're listening to Tea Party Talk with Tom Z, and we'll be back after these commercial breaks.
I'm Nick Skiriotis, president of S&K Asphalt and Concrete. As a Greek immigrant who came to America legally, my family and I have lived the American dream of freedom, hope, and opportunity. But that dream is fading due to an out-of-control federal government that is mixed up worse than a soup sandwich. We have a president who is putting more and more regulations on businesses, which is stomping economic and job growth. Government has taken more and more of our freedoms. They have taken over our health care and are trying to take over our schools with Common Core. We as Americans must wake up, get involved before it is too late. We must fight to preserve the America our founders created, a nation that was founded on faith, family, and freedom. The fight is not easy, but anything worth fighting for never is. Our founders paid a heavy price for freedom. 5 of them did not live to see the independence they were fighting for. 9 of them were tortured. 12 of them lost everything they owned, and 3 of them lost their families. Now it is our turn to sacrifice and to fight to preserve our freedoms and the American dream. I am Nick Skiriotis, president of S&K Asphalt and Concrete, and I approve this message.
Fed up with politicians who care more about special interests than people on Main Street? So is Opportunity Ohio. We're working hard to solve Ohio's toughest challenges so Ohioans can create more jobs to grow our economy. See our plans and consider a tax-deductible contribution at opportunityohio.org. Invest $25 for a signed copy of Matt Mayer's book, The Founding Debate, Where Should the Power Over Our Lives Reside? Please visit opportunityohio.org.
All right, and we are back, and we thank Dr. Codevilla for being with us. I've got my book of the ruling class right here. It's a great read, and it'll explain a lot of things that go on out there. And it's something you should definitely pick up. And I also want to thank everyone who participated in the Preppers Ball. I talked to Amanda Suffolk, and last Saturday they had a huge success. 400 and some people showed up, and they had a lot of fun with the raffles and things, and they're already planning for next year. Thanks to all of you for participating in the Preppers Ball, which we had promoted here on Tea Party Talk with TomZ. I want to get into some very important issues. There's really a coming conflict between religious rights and civil rights. And some of you may be aware of the fact that there was just a ruling last week where a 70-year-old Christian woman, she's actually a Southern Baptist, who has a floral shop in Seattle, basically was found guilty in a case brought by the ACLU and by the state attorney general of discriminating against gays. And they basically ruled that not only could she be held, her business be held accountable for discrimination, but that she could be held personally accountable for that. And so this is really, kind of the problem what we have with gay marriage. We don't have any problem with gays. We don't have any problem with them having the same rights as everyone else. The problem is that these rules are overreaching, and they're basically imposing the will of someone else on us. So the irony is, the gays want to have the same rights as everyone else, but by their forcing these issues in the way that they are, they're taking away rights that we have, and that's where this thing breaks down. And so in that case, there was the Attorney General was on a radio program where they talked about this case, and the DJ was asking the explanation from the Attorney General of Washington, Bob Ferguson. And he said, it's a consumer protection violation. In Washington State, our law is clear. We have a law against discrimination. That means you can't discriminate against folks on the basis of religion, on the basis of race, on the basis of age, for example. And then several years ago, our legislator added sexual orientation as a protected group in our laws against discrimination. Long and short story, Washington State law says that it's a consumer setting. If you sell flowers, if you're a restaurant, in a consumer setting, you cannot violate our state law against discrimination. If you do that, it's an automatic violation of our consumer protection laws. However, the disc jockey had something really interesting to say, because he basically said that law is now superseding another law that is equally clear. And the Washington State law, section in the Constitution of Washington, Section 11, religious freedom, it says, absolute freedom of conscience in all matters of religious sentiment, belief, and worship shall be guaranteed to every individual, and no one shall be molested or disturbed in person or property on account of religion. But the liberty of conscience hereby secured shall not be construed as to excuse acts of licentiousness or justify practice inconsistent with the peace and safety of the state. Okay? And so basically, the DJ is saying these people have the right of religious freedom way before this law was passed. And the Attorney General said, he said basically that if you choose to go to marketplace and serve the public, if you do that, you cannot assert religious beliefs as a mechanism or a means of discrimination on the basis of race, religion, age, sex, or sexual orientation. So what he's basically trying to say is that the state's rights basically trump your rights, your religious rights. Well, folks, why did people come to America in the first place? On large part, it was for religious freedom. They left England because of religious persecution. And in our U.S. Constitution, it says very clearly, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. That's Article 1 of the of the Constitution. All right? So religious freedom is the foundation of our nation. And now this Attorney General is saying that that the state's rights trump religious freedom. Well, we disagree. And fortunately, this very brave woman also disagrees because she has refused to settle. The state has offered her basically a settlement of $2,000. Pay the $2,000 and we'll let you go. And she has decided she will not take that. She is going to take this to court because, folks, we believe that if you continue to pursue this path and not, with people not being able to follow their religious beliefs in public, you're moving to a point where you'll only be able to practice your religion in private, in your own home. It's like the Soviet Union or China. You'll have to have church in your basement. That's what they're doing. And that's why I've said to you all along, the issue of gay marriage has nothing to do with gays or marriage. It has with an attack on our institutions. Okay, our institutions of family, our institutions of religion. And this is an attempt to destroy what has made America great, right? You can't have a representative republic unless you have a nation built on values. Where do you get your values? You learn those from religion, okay? And this is an attack on religion through gays. They're using gays for this purpose to push their socialist agenda. That's what this is about. And I defy anyone to argue me with that, but we're going to fight that, just like the guys in Alabama are doing. The judge in Alabama who said we're not going to obey the Supreme Court rule that we have to give gay marriages license to gay couples until the Supreme Court hears the ruling. And that's the way it should be. So that's what being an American is. It's fighting for your rights. Freedom is not free. We have to stand and fight for those rights. I want to talk about another thing that came up this week that was really kind of interesting. Some of you may be aware there's a big controversy about Rudy Giuliani being asked whether the president loves his country. And then Scott Walker kind of got wrapped up in this, and he got a gotcha question from the Washington Post. And they basically asked him whether he thinks, because Scott Walker's father was a pastor, okay, and he's a Christian, they wanted to ask him whether he thinks Obama's a Christian. And Walker did a great job. He said, I don't know. He said, I have actually never talked about it, and I haven't read about that. Walker said, his voice calm and firm. I've never asked him that. You've asked me to make statements about people that I haven't had a conversation with about that. How could I say if I know if either of you, as the reporters, are Christians, right? Great answer. Nice job. He went on to say, to me, this is a classic example of why people hate Washington, and increasingly they dislike the press, he said. They think they care about the things they care about don't even remotely come close to what you're asking about. He talked about how you could ask 100 people in Wisconsin, what's important to them, and none of them would say whether Barack Obama's a Christian or not is important to them. All right? That was great. That's what we want to see. That's why Scott Walker is currently leading the polls. But then he made a big mistake, right? And here's what he did. After the interview was completed, Walker's spokeswoman, Jocelyn Webster, telephoned the Washington Post to say the governor was trying to make a point of principle by not answering such questions like whether Barack Obama is a Christian and not trying to cast doubt on President Obama's faith. She said, of course the governor thinks the president is a Christian. She said, he thinks these kind of gotcha questions distract from what he's doing as governor of Wisconsin to make the state better and make life better for people in the state. This is what drives us crazy in the Tea Party. because this Jocelyn Webster needs to be fired. Because what happened is Scott Walker said the truth. And then his consultants, his liberal Republican consultants, just like Mitt Romney's, just like all the rest of these guys who are not Republicans, are not conservatives, they backed him off. And she tells the Washington Post and says he was not trying to, cast doubt on whether the president's a Christian or not. Well, and he said, of course, and this woman says, of course he thinks the president's a Christian. Well, that's not what he said. He said he doesn't know. So his own spokesman just made Scott Walker out to look like a liar. This is the problem, folks. Ronald Reagan, I was watching something on TV last night about Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan was the kind of guy who said what he meant and meant what he said. Scott Walker, we're interested in you, but you need to fire these consultants. We want people of conviction. You did a great job. Your political instincts were terrific. And then you let your people stab you in the back, just like they did with Sarah Palin. Stop it. That's what makes the Republicans not succeed. They got a bunch of consultants who don't know how to fight. Stand up and fight. Do what you believe in. And I'm glad to say that we have a friend who did do that. We had a guy who stood up and fought, a local guy here, David Beck from Beck Energy in Northeast Ohio. I want to congratulate him for the fight that he just won in the Ohio Supreme Court, which ruled 4-3 to uphold the state law that says the state is in charge of oil and gas drilling, not local municipalities. The backstory on this, folks, is that the libs who wanted to stop fracking in the state, and I've talked to you about how that was one of the biggest successes in the Tea Party movement, came into Ohio and started to try to get towns and villages that had no jurisdiction and townships to vote to stop fracking. They had no right under the law. And they were creating this idea that you could actually stop fracking when there was no basis to do that. And so they filed a lawsuit in Monroe Falls here in Northeast Ohio to stop Beck Energy from drilling on a land they had every right to drill on. And the Supreme Court upheld the lawsuit in favor of the energy company, as it should be. And that's how we win, by fighting back, folks. That was great. And finally, I want to just touch base on this whole FCC net neutrality thing. Okay, there was a poll that came out that basically says that 74% of the people, of Americans, want to know what the FCC is going to do in net neutrality before they vote on it. And that the vast majority, 3/4 of Americans, do not think it's a good idea for the government to take over the internet. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing all these people, these tech people, being played. Because what the government's doing is what they always do, just like they did with Obamacare. Well, just trust us. If you want to make sure the big guys don't hurt you, we'll take over the internet and we'll protect you. Except they don't. They then put you out of business because now they're in power. This net neutrality thing is terrible. I've got a couple things I've got to wrap up here right at the end. We've got an event on March 21st, Saturday, March 21st. The Porch County Tea Party is having a fundraising educational seminar. If you want to know about that, go to teapartytalkwithtomz.com and send me an email. Also, the Tea Party of Cincinnati is having a tax day tea party on April 15th. We'll talk more about that later. Thanks for joining me this morning. I hope you learned some things, and we'll see you again next week.
This is former State Representative Matt Lynch inviting you to join me for Common Sense Conservative Conversation each Wednesday evening at 6:30 p.m. on How I See It. You can listen live or listen to the podcast anytime, 24/7 at mattlynch.com. Each week I am joined by my daughter Karen Quay on a rhino hunt as we separate the phonies from the real conservatives who are willing to stand up for faith, family, and freedom. We challenge the politically correct politicians who say one thing to get your vote, then do another once they are in office. 2015 is a new year, but too many of our politicians didn't get the message that business as usual in Washington is no longer acceptable. If our representatives in Congress are too scared or too weak to speak up, then we must raise our voices and demand they fight back against the liberal loonies. Never forget that we, the voters, are in charge, and we are the masters of our government, and we cannot let politicians ever forget it. So listen in every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. or anytime at mattlynch.com. I'm Matt Lynch, and that's how I see it.